My name is Wendy Rogers. I am the Kahn Professor of Applied Health Sciences at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I'm really excited to participate in this NSF-sponsored workshop entitled Liberate. I'd like to have my remarks be focused on the importance of designing for an aging population. My lab is the Human Factors and Aging Laboratory, and our PowerPoint template here shows off some of the members of our family that we think about when we're designing for an aging population. We all probably have a general sense that populations are getting older. This is a graphic developed by the World Health Organization that shows in 2015 the percentage of individuals who are over the age of 60 in different parts of the world. And the bright blue shows that between 10 and 30% of those populations are already over age 60. The darker blue is over 30% of the populations. Look what happens in 2050. You see this dramatic growth worldwide of the number of individuals who are over the age of 60. As I mentioned, this is data that comes from the World Report on Aging and Health put out by the World Health Organization. I highly recommend looking at this report. It's very informative. One of the things that they focus on is the idea that healthy aging is an investment. It's not a cost. And by investing in health systems, long-term care systems, lifelong learning, age-friendly environments, social protection, these investments will yield benefits in health and knowledge and mobility and social connectivity and so on that will lead to returns both at the level of the individual as well as at society levels in terms of entrepreneurship and social and cultural contributions. So the overall goal needs to be to maximize functional ability. This report also put out priority areas for action, the importance of thinking about how everyone can grow old in an age-friendly environment, to develop long-term care systems that will enable this aging successfully. To think about people now, so align our health systems to the older populations that are now being served. And then importantly, we need to better measure, monitor, and understand these age-related issues. And I'm optimistic that we'll see tremendous growth in these areas because the WHO has designated this the decade of healthy aging. It's important to remember that there's no typical older person. There are going to be individual differences in health, functional status. Obviously, there are differences in culture, race, and ethnicity, as well as education and income, literacy, living arrangements, life experiences in general, and specifically with relation to technology, as well as individual differences in personality, attitudes, motivations. And so we can't think of people over the age of 60 or 65 as a single user group. I mentioned 60 or 65. The WHO usually designates older above the age of 60, whereas in the United States, usually the demarcation is 65 plus. So either a category holds here. It is true that as people age, there are typical age-related changes in things such as health, mobility, vision, hearing, some cognitive functions, often the opportunity for social interaction, and they tend to have increased support needs. I also want to highlight, though, that not all older adults will develop dementia. So this graphic shows the percentage of the prevalence of dementia for different age groups. And what you see is that even up to the age of 75 to 79, roughly 10% of the population may have dementia, but that means 90% of the population will not. Up to age 80, 84, 20%. See, the numbers do go up, but that still leaves 80% of the population who are aging without dementia. And we just need to be aware of that as we're designing for them. Another point that I wish to make is this idea of disability and understanding what that means for older adults. So these data come from the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, and they estimate that 15% of the population worldwide over 1 billion individuals live with one or more disabling conditions. And if we're focusing on older adults, more than 46% of them are going to have disabilities, and 250 million of them are going to have moderate to severe disabilities. This graphic comes from a paper that we published this past year, and we're trying to make the point that the research that focuses on aging is often quite distinct from the research and activities that focus on disability. And we need to think about how do we bring these two focus areas together. So in the aging area, the focus is on older adults, often health conditions and therapeutics, with a focus on maybe remedying or improving health conditions. Whereas on disability side, the focus is on what is their impairment? Can we design some kind of prosthetic to support those needs? And how do we support activity performance or community living? And here the focus tends to be more on rehabilitation. There's not that much at the intersection focused on aging with disability and understanding how those two things may go together. My colleagues and I developed this model to better represent how to think about disabilities. And if you think about the left side, this comes from the ICF model, which was represented on the previous side, the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health. Think about body structures and functions. So you might have an individual who has an impairment, or maybe you have individuals who have age-related changes. And when they're in particular contexts, certain things are facilitators that will enable them to have successful performance with whatever it is that they're trying to do. Now, there may also be barriers that lead to disability. Now, what happens when we're looking at older adults who have both an impairment as well as age-related changes? Now, some of these former facilitators turn into barriers, and you end up having a higher rate of disability for older individuals. And this is what we want to think about when we're designing assistive technologies. That's the focus of the workshop, is living better through rehabilitative and assistive technologies. And we need to think about, well, what is it that older adults are doing? What is it that we need to be supporting? Activities of daily living, we often think about, these are critical for independence, bathing, eating, drinking, mobility. How do we support those activities? Next is the category we call instrumental activities of daily living, which includes preparing meals, paying bills, managing medications, perhaps maintaining the home environment, also very important for independence. The third category I think of as the more quality of life types of activities. We call these enhanced activities of daily living. And this includes things such as social communication, hobbies, new learning, continuing to work or volunteer, and participating in one's community. When we think about what assistive technologies we're designing, we need to think of all these different activities that older adults might be engaged in. We also need to think about the acceptance of the technologies that we're developing. So this is a model that we developed focused on acceptance of new healthcare technologies. I won't go into it in all detail, but I just want to point out a few things that influence one's intention to adopt a new technology: perceived ease of use, perceived usefulness, facilitating conditions, as well as social influences. And there are also many things that influence those factors, as well as moderators such as sex, age, education, ability, self-efficacy, and so on. All of these things are going to influence one's intention, which ultimately will influence their adoption of these assistive technologies. So we can't forget about this component of technology uptake. If the assistive technologies we're thinking about are well designed and we provide support for people learning to use them, in our experience, older adults are quite open-minded about trying new technologies. And we just need to keep their needs, their limitations, their preferences in mind, and we need to engage them in the design process. So I hope that we think about these things as we move forth with this workshop. I wanted to introduce you to my team. This is the Human Factors in Aging Laboratory team. our website, my email address, and then the sources of funding for our research come from the Administration for Community Living, as well as the National Institutes of Health. I'm very excited to be a part of this workshop. Thank you.